Hello and welcome to yet another live session. Today we're back with wastewater wisdom. David, it's your favourite subject.
It is certainly favourite work subject. Let's just clarify that. But yes, very much my favourite graph subject in terms
What's
of.
your favourite subject overall?
Oh, well, I shouldn't have really brought that up, should I? Well, it's probably going to be.
Wastewater treatment. It is. He's lying. It is his favourite subject. And thank you, one and all, for coming to today's live session. We've once again got our resident specialist on all things wastewater treatment, David Stagg, in the hot seat to answer your questions and any burning topics. So today we'll be covering off the differences between a septic tank and a cesspool. We'll be then looking at all the news stories regarding wastewater treatment in the world of wastewater treatment, and then we'll be answering any questions that come in during today's session. But first and foremost, David, how was your weekend?
It was very pleasant, thank you. Managed to catch up with the family. We had a nice takeaway.
Nice. What'd you have?
The thing with our family takeaways is that we generally go to Chinese, Indian, and the fish and chip shop, which is all like kind of local in Woodford, which is kind of a bit of a random assortment of stuff.
You have all three on one night,
but not all three on one night. So basically, we'll generally, of course, as with many people don't really believe in the leftovers conundrum, but we generally have. I had Indian the first night, and then there was some leftover Chinese, so I had to warmed up Chinese the next day, which is good. But yeah, when you go to when I say the fish and chip shop, that's kind of like the odd one out there. But generally, you go to the fish and chip shop to get some proper like chips to go with your curry.
I need to come for a takeaway around your house because this sounds amazing. It seems like a takeaway crawl. Like instead of a pub crawl, you just have Chinese. I'd love that. Yeah.
So that was my Saturday evening with the family. So all 12 of us managed to get together.
Nice.
That was good, thank you. I know. How was your weekend?
David. I'm glad you asked. Well, it was my big 26th birthday on
yes,
Sunday.
You mentioned it last week.
And Friday night, I was out in Birmingham with my friends playing. Have you ever been to Flight Club?
I did. No, I haven't, but I did
Darts?
see some things that you posted.
Yes, so it's a bar which basically has interactive darts board. So it has a load of mini games like snakes and ladders. There's one called Shanghai where you have to like go around the board and hit the numbers. And I absolutely smashed my friends to pieces at darts.
An interactive dartboard.
Yeah, so obviously it's like a normal dartboard and you throw the darts, but then it has sensors to read like single, triple, double. So the board senses what you've hit, so then it allocates points to the different mini games that you're playing. It is very good, very fun, and the best thing is there's a little camera to the side, so you can take pictures and videos like throughout the evening. But say if you hit like a really nice shot, it records it and then records your celebrations.
Okay.
So that was the clip you saw of me.
Okay.
So we played a mini game called Shanghai, and basically there's 1 to 8 rounds, and every round equals either 1 point. So round 1 is 1 point, round 2 2 points, round 3 3 points, so on to round 8. Obviously got single, triple, and a double. So if you get triple on round 1, hit the triple, you get 3 points. And then hit the double, it's 2. So then on round 2, if you hit the triple, it's 6. And if you hit the double, it's 4.
So if it gets more, as you further on, it's more and more impactful.
Yes. Yeah. And this was round 6, I believe.
And you hit the triple.
I hit a single, then I hit a double, and then I hit a triple. And then, I celebrated. And then the camera got it, and I was able to download it. And that's what you saw the clip. So that was Friday night. Saturday night was at my family, just a buffet, drinks, played a few kind of board games.
So Saturday was your actual birthday?
No, Sunday. My actual birthday.
Go on. Yep.
But Sunday I had a surprise, which was I did the Skywalk at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium.
Yep.
Obviously my beloved Spurs. Went down to London for the day, did the Skywalk. Unfortunately, didn't get to see the game, and then went shopping around London. And then the best birthday gift of all is Harry Kane scored and broke the record for Tottenham's all-time goal scorer. Now 267.
267 and counting.
It is counting. I would love him to break Alan Shearer's record. He needs 61 to go.
That's a big record. I mean, it'll be an achievement if you can get to 300. To be fair, but
he's currently on 200, and he's 29. I think he's 29 years old. 10 to 30 this year. We dive.
He's got some time in him. You've got at least 3 or 4 more seasons.
So at the end of the season, he should finish on 210, which means he's then got 2. I reckon then he'll break it in like 3 seasons after this season. So it's doable. I will cry when it happens. I will cry tears of joy. But anyway, we're going off subject, and now it's time to talk your favourite subject.
Wastewater treatment.
Wastewater treatment. And our main topic for today, which we have decided to discuss, is the difference between a septic tank and a cesspool and the benefits of each type of system.
Okay, so just to make it clear for everyone, generally you would need to consider a cesspool and a septic tank for an off-mains system to treat or collect foul water. So then if it's not impacting the environment. So firstly, if we start with a cesspool, very simplistic in terms of its design and how it works. A cesspool is a holding tank where all the foul water, so the foul water, so your black water and grey water, discharged from your property, from your showers, toilets, sinks, wherever it may be, goes down into a tank. Can be underground, can be above ground. More traditionally, it's underground, where that waste will just be collected and stored, and that volume will build up quite quickly. And then with that build-up of waste, you'll have to get it emptied quite frequently. So you need to arrange for a specialist like treatment company to come in, pump the tank out, and then take off to municipal treatment works, where it will then be treated biologically to reduce the impact it has on the environment there. So it's very simplistic in terms of its design. It's of course very old-fashioned with the modern-day technology of pumping it out and taking it off somewhere. That's something which is a bit more civilized. Before it used to be just we'll fill it in and we'll just dig another one. So yeah, times have changed. Cesspools are slightly better than they have been historically. And cesspools generally have the benefit of, if you can't comply with any of the other types of tank, any of the types of solutions, so you can't connect into a mains, you can't install a treatment plant or a septic, a cesspool is pretty much going to be your only option. So that is the go-to if everything else seems impossible. So if you're very remote and you can't really gain access to, or there's no feasibility to percolate to the ground, a cesspool is what you would fall back on. So the benefit of a cesspool is that is the go-to if everything else proves impossible. A septic tank is the next stage up from that. They are generally exactly the same thing. A septic tank will collect all of the bulk water discharged from a property from the grey and the foul. It will channel down into this tank. The septic tank will basically retain the solids within that tank, and then any liquid discharge, so from your showers and sinks and so on, will then discharge into a drainage field, which is a specialist way to discharge water from a tank into the ground, where it will basically provide some treatment to that water just due to the Herringbone system that it has designed. Now, a septic tank system, of course, will have an inflow and an outflow, and then it will have potentially one or many different chambers throughout it to split the waste up, so we retain the solids within the tank. So it's pretty much treatment via settlement, so allowing all the solid waste to settle at the bottom, and then it then is just retained within that tank. So with a septic tank, again, you will need to get it pumped out. So the frequency of which it's pumped out is very much based upon the size of the tank and, of course, the number of people feeding it. But typically, septic tanks would need to get emptied potentially at a minimum every 6 months or so. The manufacturer of the tank will be able to give you some guidance depending on the size of the property and how many people are going to be living there. But a septic tank, of course, will need to be pumped out. It's very similar to a cesspool, but not as frequently. In terms of the environmental impact for both systems, generally the cesspool would have been emptied quite frequently. That's any sort of like emissions from those vehicles transporting the goods and, of course, taking it off sites to treat it. That's going to have a quite heavy impact on the environment. With a septic tank, needing to be emptied less frequently. That's going to be better in terms of the emissions side, but then we are discharging quite high concentrations of like ammonia and stuff into the ground, which it will percolate through and we'll get some treatment, but there is some environmental impact on that. So if and where people can do, it's always recommended to upgrade to a treatment plant. That's just slightly off topic, but treatment plants are really the future where people can install them. That's where they should go. So yeah, I think that's generally kind of it. Generally, people should, of course, consider installation and logistics side of things. So if they're considering either a septic tank, cesspool, where is it going to be installed on site? With the cesspool, it's typically very big to retain the waste from the discharge, and of course, when you get it empty, then of course there's a lot more to be discharged away. So the cost for a cesspool is significantly more than the septic. So something else for people to bear in mind.
You mentioned there just a second ago when they have to install a cesspool, it's because there's no other choice. They can't do mains, go to a treatment plant, or go to a septic tank. So what dictates basically each type of system, whether they can or what system they need to install? What dictates that?
The initial guidance will come from the planning potentially for the project. That's always a good place to start. You'll then need to speak to the environmental body for the area to see if there's any restrictions in terms of discharge of foul water. There are, of course, other options away from like the general binding rules, where you, with a septic tank, if you should be with a domestic size system, certainly you would discharge to a drainage field by the code of practice, and then by compliance code of practice, you then don't need a permit for discharge. And likewise, if you're installing a treatment plant, you can, of course, discharge to a watercourse. Again, volume dependence in terms of the size of the system. So with that, you generally need to obviously really protect the environment as much as anyone can do. The environmental agency for the area will give you an indication of what kind of restrictions are in the area. That will give you a bit of a steer in terms of the solution you would need to incorporate. Of course, favour the one which is going to have the least impact in terms of damaging the environment. If you rule out all other options in terms of the better side of things, then of course you would have to then lean towards a cesspool. Very old school in terms of how it works, but there's just sometimes that's the only option. People will have to use that, so they're not discharging their foul water directly into the environment. At least then it's taken away, treated properly, and then used back into industry, whether it be agriculture or whatever it might be. There are better options for us to really consider the disposal of our wastewater.
Perfect. Well, you've gone into great detail about that, and that certainly answered that question. So now it's time for my favourite part of today's session. As always, is in the news. So we've got two news stories that we've researched and thought we'd discuss and share with you guys. So the first one is sewage overspills that currently in the UK are due to a lack of infrastructure investment. Research done by the Imperial College of London has found that recent sewage overspills has come down to mainly a lack of investment in infrastructure.
Okay.
Obviously, as we know, the sewer system has been installed for hundreds of years, realistically. And research done has showed that only, I think in last year, only 1% of all sewage waste was actually repaired, investigated and maintained, which means there's 99% of the sewage works in the UK that aren't being regularly monitored, maintained and basically repaired, which meant that so many overspills has been happening in the past year or so. We've seen loads. I think there's one happened in Southern Water just last week of the sewage that seeped out into homes and also some businesses. It literally just flooded out of the sewer because it was just overworked and just flooded the street and flooded some homes, just raw sewage, which is horrific. And I obviously do empathise with those with those people of having their homes.
It really is insane when you look at the other side of the coin, where we've talked about previously on this channel, where we've got all the new developments that are having to perform so well to the restricted new ways of how much the newer systems have on the environment. And then when you look at historically all these other systems, you say 99% there, that's just absolutely insane number of systems, which a little bit of innovation and future technology could do a huge amount for the impacts that's currently having on the environment.
Yes. And the other issue is these main sewage works that you kind of see on the screen there, these waterways, which most of the sewage goes to when it's connected to main water. I think I was doing some research and found that a lot of them are working over capacity at this moment in time, because there have been so many housing estates being built here, there and everywhere that there's just this added capacity onto the infrastructure for dealing with sewage. And obviously that's not being upgraded at the same time that all these housing developments are being built, which is causing large strain and large overspills. I mean, this is something that I found so tragic is when I was doing research for today's live session, was all the news stories when it comes around sewage is like how many spills and firms are being fined for not regulating it. There was just one up the road in Brackley where Anglian Water were fined, I think, £500,000 for a sewage overspill in a lake in Brackley, which killed over 5,000 fish. Within, I think it was a 21-hour period, it was just seeping sewage directly into this lake, into this pond, into this lake, sorry. And it was literally, 21 hours, and that resulted in a 51 or £500,000 fine. And there was so many, like I mentioned, that one in the Southern Water where there's so many overspills, so many raw sewage being seeped out, and there's a group, I think, down in the south, the surfers group that trying to raise the awareness of sewage being dumped straight basically into the ocean in the south, because when they go surfing, they say they're literally surfing in sewage half the time. There's so much being discharged and not treated because, one, our infrastructure is not being maintained and upgraded properly, and two, most of our systems are being over capacity. I say our systems, the mains treatment works, not obviously small package
It's
treatment
pretty
plants.
shocking, really, because we as Great Britain, as we'll class it as, think ourselves quite highly developed in terms of technology and stuff. And there's stuff going on in the background, which like out of sight, which is just unbelievable. I mean, you kind of think this going to be potentially, I'll get told off saying this again. You would think about this potentially happening in a less developed country all the time, because they just don't have access to the construction industry, the high level of pipe work, the quality of the equipment. But to hear this is happening in the UK is unbelievable.
And yeah, I think it mainly comes down to, like you say, it's just those more developed, or those developing nations don't have as much investment as what we would have. However, it's happening more often than not. And doing research in this for every session, you just see so many overspills, so many overflows, so many just charging in the wrong places. Which leads very nicely onto my next topic that I found. So this was picked up in The Guardian, and they're reporting that water firms could lose public funds unless they pledge to stop UK sewage spills. So what they're finding is that the government is now threatening these firms that look after our waterways with obviously reducing their funding if they don't work to reducing the amount of sewage in our waterways, which I think is taking me back quite a bit. I think, these firms are in charge of looking after our waterways, yet there's so much going on, like happening behind the scenes, that we don't know about. And they've been asked to really look at the waterways and the quality of water, because so much is happening, which we really need to keep, which we don't know about, in terms of sewage seeping into waterways, our rivers being polluted and damaging local wildlife, like it says in that news article. And it's just scary to think of what's happening that we don't know about. And this is happening, and the fact that they could be, losing funding because they're not doing what we need them to do. And it did mention there about the Environment Secretary even saying that she doesn't care about the waterways, because I think they've given a deadline of 2050 to have this all done by and all sorted, which is so far enough. Like, if you think about a timeline, that's so far in the future, and they need to do something a lot quicker. And it's not only the infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, but they're also talking about farmers and agriculture, because we've mentioned on this show about nutrient neutrality and fixing the nutrients coming out of wastewater. But now the agricultural industry is being hit with that as well, because the water runoff from farms is causing a lot of algal blooms, as we've seen happening, and it's affecting the sewage treatment industry. And even agricultural firms are being asked to really look into ways they can improve it. So yeah, 2 negative news stories, which I struggle to find a really positive sewage
Outlook.
treatment news story. Did we have the do we have the little mini robots last show?
I think that was maybe in the first show that we did.
But was that the last Wastewater Wisdom? We had the little mini robots.
No,
Was that Rainbow Research?
no, it was Wastewater, but this. I'm pretty sure we've been back now, but this is our 3rd week back. The mini robots was the.
But anyway,
the
that
first
was a
week.
positive news story. It's just there's so many negative stuff about sewage treatment in terms of so many overspills, lack of investment,
Well,
poor
we need
infrastructure.
to raise people's awareness of these things.
Yeah, no, we need to make these positive news stories happen. I'm tired of all these negative ones. But anyway, that's it for today's In the News section. Hopefully we'll be back next week for Stormwater Schools, a bit more upbeat and positive, less of it, oh God. But anyway, now it's time to answer any questions that have come in during today's live session. So our fabulous assistants in the background will have them up on the screen. And the first question that's come in is how to tell if my septic tank is full. Very on point with today.
Well, you kind of instigate questions, I suppose, based on what you hear. So with this one, there's generally some good ways to tell, which is very much a proactive, and then there is very much some bad ways you can tell, which is very reactive. So the best way to tell if your septic tank is full is to be proactive, of course, and generally find out how big the tank is, and then get some guidelines from the manufacturer in terms of what they expect the storage capacity of that septic tank to be. So it could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, but that will vary slightly depending on the size of the tank and how many people are feeding it. If you want to get a bit more hands-on, with septic tanks, you're very much retaining the solid waste within the tank, and then you've got liquid discharge. So we need to ascertain how much sludge we've got in that tank, and the best way you can do that is to lift the tank cover, put a stick down into the tank, and then basically lift it up, and then just measure how much solid waste is on that stick. Now, you may want to get a specialist servicing company to do that, but
wear gloves.
Yes, wear gloves. All the right safety equipment. You don't want to be full. Don't want to be.
Pinch your nose.
Yeah, indeed. Pegging your nose. That's the most important one. So that's a very good, accurate way of seeing how big the tank is. Of course, you can measure that against the total height of the tank to gauge whether it's 50, 60, whatever percentage full. The less proactive way, so the reactive ways to see if something's going wrong. You could potentially see if you've got, basically, as you just said, odours potentially coming from the tank. If you've got very poor odours, basically that means that there's something biologically wrong within the tank. So it might be a good indication to investigate further. Also, if you've got your potential drains backing up, so if you've got residual water in your pipelines, that means that the water in the drainage field is no longer soaking away. So again, very much a means to investigate. Something which is kind of a good and a bad, but if you're discharging into a drainage field which is under a lawn, if your lawn is looking very flush and is really doing very well, again, that means that you've got potentially a lot of nutrients going into that water, potentially helping your grass grow, which is a big thumbs up, but it might also be worth investigating whether we have got the system back up as well. So just a few things to be careful of, but yeah, there is very much a reactive side and a proactive side to really understanding if your septic tank is full.
This is slightly off topic, but goes on the question. My grandparents used to live in France, right? And their property was right out in the sticks, so they needed a tank. And I was talking about it the other day because obviously wastewater treatment takes over your life, as you know. Mm-hmm. And they had a cesspool. Is for them too. It was a 3-4 bedroom house, couple of bathrooms, and a couple of wet rooms. Guess how big the cesspool was? They emptied it once a year to give you a good.
And do they live there all 365 days a year?
Yes, other than a month, they'd come over for Christmas.
Okay. I'd like to say it's big. Based on the regulations in terms of how you should size a septic pool, I imagine it's absolutely humongous. But I think I'm kind of go the flip side of the coin here, and I'm going to go with small. By the way, you posed the question. 50,000 liters.
50.
Yeah.
No. No.
Too big.
Very too big.
Okay.
15,000.
15,000. That's quite small, really.
Really?
Yeah,
15,000 litre tank
yeah, that's
for
small.
2 people.
Yep, that's small.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's France. That's probably why. Anyway.
They must do a lot of eating out.
Yeah. I thought it was quite big.
No, for a cesspool, that's tiny.
Ah, well, France. That's why. We're gardeners. Anyway, next question. So the next question that's come in is, how often does a sewage treatment plant need emptying?
Okay, very similar to the last question. So with emptying of a treatment plant, again, the frequency is kind of indicated by the manufacturer initially. So certainly on a domestic level, so for like a single dwelling, most manufacturers would size the systems in accordance with getting the system emptied once per year. And generally, most people should be doing that anyway, just to ensure that you've got a good biological process in the tank. When you empty a wastewater treatment plant, it's generally quite good practice to leave some of the activated sludge in the base of the tank, so you don't fully empty it, so you can get a continued working performance from the bacteria in the tank. Ensure always got very good quality of effluent. In addition to that, you generally want to consider, I suppose, the number of people feeding it, which is, and of course the size. So most wastewater treatment systems are generally sized in terms of the maximum potential number of people you can have in the property, which is most of the time oversized based on the number of people feeding it. So you may get a little bit of a buffer in terms of how much longer you would have. So if they say a year, you may be able to get a little bit more than that if you've got low loading. You then also need to consider if the homeowner is feeding the system, so you can introduce a feed for the bacteria to improve the performance, or a kickstarter to get it working more quickly. And there are also other products on the market which reduce the amount of sludge in the tank, which again, if you're using a reducer, that means you're going to have to get it emptied less often. Reducers are generally quite good because they retain like a static level of sludge in the tank, which is generally around about 40 to 60%. And to really get optimal treatment performance in terms of from the bacteria, that's kind of where you want it to be. That's when you get very good quality of effluent. So something else to consider if you are going to be using feeders reducers to improve performance, that will of course have an influence in terms of the frequency of how often you get it emptied. But generally, on a domestic level, try to stick with a year. On commercial level, it will be more frequent. Again, the manufacturer will give you a guideline based on the sludge storage volume for the tank, but it could be that it's anything from 2 to 4 times a year. Again, very dependent on the application, the sources of waste coming into the tank, and how much waste is entering it versus the sludge storage chamber.
Perfect. That answers that one. Thank you, David. And the next question that we've had come in during today is, can a sewage treatment plant discharge into a pond?
Oh, okay. So with discharges, very much from a treatment plant, which is by far better, the treatment's performance in terms of the quality of discharge versus certainly a septic. The quality of water, you are still going to have some biological process and microorganisms escaping for the foul water treatment plants. So that is something to very much be considered, because it will have an impact on the environment. The general brine rules will pretty much state that you will still need to discharge to ground from a septic tank or into a flowing water course. So the nutrients are not retained on the sites, they are channeled away. So there is less impact to the environment. Of course, that is very much subject to the amount of water being discharged as well. If you discharge into ground, you can only discharge up to 2 cubic meters. And if you go into a water course, it's 5 cubic meters per day. So that's generally based on, of course, the population size. So the more people you have, the more water you're going to discharge. That's something very much for all people to consider. If you're going to be going over those 2 volumes I just mentioned in terms of the discharge, so that's 2,000 for ground, 5,000 for a wastewater treatment plant going to a water course, you very much need to apply for a permit of discharge. And that permit of discharge will be in relation to the volume of discharge. Now, with the permit of discharge, that will then open the scope up for the way you can discharge the water. So that could include discharge into a pond under very special circumstances. It does also mean other types of discharge, like boreholes and all that sort of stuff as well. So very much try and stick with the general brine rules where you can. Anything outside of that, you will need a permit for discharge.
Perfect. that answer that. And if they would want to get a permit, where would they need to go?
The local environment agency for the area will generally issue them a permit for discharge based on, of course, the restrictions they have in place. And then they will also tell you how good the quality of effluent will need to be. So that would dictate whether you need to have a septic tank, a treatment plant, or maybe a treatment plant with additional features to try and bring that nutrient level and discharge down to a much better quality.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Any more questions that have come in? I can't see them on the screen. No, we've got a shake of the head. And I believe that is it for the questions. And is it for today's wastewater wisdom session. David, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Callum. It's been a pleasure as always.
And you've got next week off. It is Stormwater School.
Stormwater School next week.
You can have a rest. Although we can do enough research if you feel like it. But that's fine. I'll give you a week off this time.
I'll just come on with my stormwater hat on. I'm sure Lisa would love that.
Do you want to try it?
No, you get someone else on the couch. I'm sure everyone, the audience, will need a break from me, certainly. About wastewater treatment and rainwater harvesting.
You're a cult hero here, David. You're the favourite. But anyway, that is it for today's Wastewater Wisdom live session. Thank you for watching and taking part, David. Thank you again, once again, for your time today. And we'll see you next week, hopefully, on the Stormwater School session. And David will be back in the hot seat in 2 weeks' time to talk all things rainwater.
Rainwater, yeah.
So he's very much looking forward to that. But anyway, like I said, thank you once again for watching, and we'll see you next time.